Our next speaker, of course, is Dr. Paul's son, also a graduate of Duke Medical School and an eye surgeon. So without further ado, may I introduce Rand Paul.
Reagan's advisors told him not to do it. They said there could be international repercussions. And Reagan did it anyway. He went ahead and told this story to Gorbachev at one of the summits. It seems there was an accountant in Moscow who had saved many years for a car, to buy a car. But all the cars were manufactured by the state, so he saved his money for years and years, and he went in to buy his car, and he handed his money to the surly bureaucrat there. And the bureaucrat looked at him, counted the money, and he said, "Okay, it'll be ready in about 10 years. And the accountant didn't miss a beat. He said, "Well, will that be on a Tuesday or a Wednesday?" And the surly bureaucrat looked back at him and he said, "You idiot, I just told you it'd be 10 years, and you want to know whether it's going to be ready on a Tuesday or a Wednesday?" And he said, "Yeah, well, the plumber's coming on that Wednesday." Apparently, Gorbachev took it good-naturedly. I guess you couldn't live in the Soviet Union and not chuckle a little bit about the lines, the rationing, the shortages. This reminds me of a scene from the movie Brazil. In the opening scenes of this movie, there's a guy in full body armor, automatic weapon on his back, and he's scaling a high-rise apartment. He climbs over the balcony and he knocks furtively on the door, and from inside you hear, "Who is it?" And he says, "It's the plumber." Only in a totalitarian society could something so mundane as bringing the plumber to your house require that he come dressed as a commando to evade the state requirements and licensure rules for plumbing. Well, many might say, well, that's just the Soviet communism. That's not America. That's some crazy novel or movie that you're talking about. But when I built my first house in 1996, I found out that the government was interested in everything. They were even interested in what kind of toilets I had in my house. It seems that I couldn't put a toilet in that had more than 1.4 gallons. Well, we discovered pretty quickly that it doesn't work. If anybody's ever read Dave Barry, he's got lots of columns on this, and they're hilarious, but really not that funny if you own these toilets. Well, anyway, I was looking on the internet too long ago to see, well, what kind of response has the government made to this toilet crisis? Well, there is a response. There's an official bureaucratic response to the toilet problem. And he says, look, you flush twice and you get a plunger. Well, I guess anything above a latrine is fine for the government. And that's sort of what we get from government. Well, how did we get legislation that requires how much water is in your toilet? Well, it came about through the Clean Water Act of 1994. And what happens in Congress when you call something Clean Water Act? They're all afraid to vote against it because everybody's for clean water. So they stampede and they fall all over themselves to vote for things. They don't read the legislation. The legislation is hundreds of pages long, and you get things like this stuck in, and it takes us decades to try to remove onerous things that are stuck in these large bills. Government stampedes. Government has no true ideology. You look at the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was given and foisted upon us in the hysteria after 9/11. Nobody reads it. It's printed up as they're voting. It's voted on at 2 in the morning. Not one person could have read the bill before it was voted upon. This kind of mass hysteria is sort of what pushes legislation. This most recent episode with the bailout, I think, was a classic example. Not only was there hysteria because something had happened in the marketplace, that this was about to happen, the government actually became the prime progenitor of the panic. Have you ever seen government being the leader of the panic? Every night, we're on the brink of disaster. Jon Stewart would make fun of this at night. He'd say, well, they didn't pass it last night, so we were on the brink. Now we must be on the brink of disaster. Every day we were pushed. They pushed so hard that it was inevitable that the day that we finally won a battle and we defeated the bailout that first day, the market went down 700 points. It did so because day after day after day, they said, we have to have this. The government led the panic, basically. what we find, the one consistent principle in these bills that are passed overwhelmingly and the pressure, the one consistent principle we have in Washington is that they lack principle. But I think that's where we come in. Where we come in is that there is an ideological vacuum in Washington. And we pushed that vacuum in the right direction recently when we won the bailout the first time around. But you see it pushes back, and special interests push back. And within 2 days, $150 billion worth of pork was added, and we get the vote reversed. So a bad bill became worse, and then they passed it. What we have to have in this time of crisis, and I truly do think this is a time of crisis, we have to have answers. We didn't fully have the answers during the Great Depression and afterwards. We lost the academic battle. All the history books were written by people who blamed capitalism. We have to defend capitalism, and we need to point out that this was not capitalism that failed. If we don't, this is not an academic discussion, we will get more of what we got in the 1930s, but many times over, and we may well destroy the currency in the process. When people blame capitalism, look to people like George Reisman. He got his PhD in economics under von Mises. He was also an associate of Ayn Rand. He's written recently about capitalism. When they blame capitalism, ask them how 40% of the national income is government spending. The Federal Register has 73,000 pages of federal regulations. That's not capitalism. In the last 10 years, 10,000 new pages have been added. Of the cabinet-level positions, 9 out of 15, their primary goal is to regulate the economy. So when they blame capitalism, we must point out to them over and over again that what we have now is not capitalism. We have very little vestige left of laissez-faire capitalism. We still have private property, but we have largely regulated economy, and we cannot let capitalism take the blame for this, or we'll get even less capitalism than we have now. The other thing that just infuriates me is they blame greed. Not that greed is a great thing to have, but it's a misdirection. It's a misdirection on blaming what went wrong, and it's an indirect way of blaming capitalism. What is greed? Greed maybe is an excess of self-interest. But what drives capitalism? Self-interest and profit. They are good things. When does self-interest become greed? That's sort of a subjective thing that we can decide, and we can criticize someone for being greedy, but it's a way of escaping the real argument of what happened in this crisis. How did all of the people in the mortgage industry just become greedy? Were they not greedy 5 years ago? Did people get a human failing all of a sudden out of nowhere and just become greedy? It's a ridiculous argument, but it's an argument that they used, and it's still in our history textbooks, our high school textbooks, our junior high textbooks. When they explain the American Depression, they say it was greed. It was greedy speculators. Hans Sennholz mentions this when he talks about the Depression. He was another economist under von Mises, and he says greedy speculators were blamed for this, but no one looked at the details of what caused this. In this vacuum where Congress has no ideology, where people have no ideology, we must provide the answers for why this occurred, but we must not let them blame it on capitalism or greed. The other thing they blame, and this was in the airport when I came through, Condé Nast magazine, greed and stupidity caused the crisis. Well, the same question, how did people all of a sudden become stupid all at one time? You know, in just one segment of the economy, the housing industry, they all became stupid. No, they based their decisions in a rational manner. They based their decisions on profit. But why did they loan money to somebody who had a $120,000 house and had no down payment? They did it because they watched the price curve of homes. Since the Depression, the price curve had been gradually rising for 60 some odd years. And then about 5 years ago, the price curve went up exponentially. So prices were rising so fast on houses that you could buy a $120,000 house with no money down, and a year later, it was worth $160,000. Magic, you've got $40,000 worth of equity now. And they did it based on that you can loan. As long as that curve goes up, you can keep loaning money and to even more risky loans. You can do it as long as the price curve goes up. But once the price curve reversed, that's when we had the problem. Now, why was the price curve going up? We have to acknowledge that the price curve was going up, and we need to explain to these people is because interest rates were kept low. They were kept artificially below what the marketplace does. In a free